Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where President Trump is again testing the limits of his power and his ability to crack down on his rivals. Posting on social media today that Chicago's Democratic Mayor Brandon Johnson and Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker should be in jail, alleging they both have failed to protect ICE agents, but not saying what the crime is. The White House then doubling down with a statement saying J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson have blood on their hands for failing to adequately protect Chicago, maligning them as Trump deranged buffoons. This all comes as federalized National Guard troops from Texas arrive in Chicago despite objections from local officials. Governor Pritzker responding to the president this afternoon during a live interview on MSNBC.
I got to say, this guy's unhinged. He's insecure. He's a wannabe dictator. And there's one thing I really want to say to Donald Trump. If you come for my people, you come through me. So come and get me. And I got to say, he can't arrest. We've done nothing wrong here. And very importantly, it's Donald Trump that is breaching the Constitution, breaking the law. We're taking him to court, and I believe we're going to win.
Now, we also just heard from the president at an event focused on fighting Antifa, a decentralized group of left-wing extremists, which the White House has used to paint the Democratic Party more broadly as an extremist organization. The president accusing officials from Illinois as well as Oregon of obstructing his immigration crackdowns.
Everything we're doing is very lawful. What they're doing is not lawful. And what the governor and the mayor of, as an example, you could say of Portland, and you can say certainly of Chicago, is not lawful what they're doing. They have to be very careful.
We should note those comments follow some incendiary rhetoric from the president, calling Democrats the party of Satan and comparing them to insurrectionists. And 5 sources now tell NBC News that the Trump administration is having increasingly serious discussions about invoking the Insurrection Act, which would give the president the authority to deploy active duty troops inside the U.S. for law enforcement purposes. The president's attacks against his rivals coming as another one of his political foes. Former FBI Director James Comey appeared in a federal courtroom pleading not guilty to 2 charges alleging he made false statements to Congress in 2020. And those charges coming just days after the president publicly pressured Attorney General Pam Bondi to pursue cases against his opponents, including Comey by name. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins me now from Chicago. I'm also joined by NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. We should note that there's that ongoing event at the White House. We will dip into it once the president starts answering questions. But Shaq, let me start with you. What has been the reaction to the president's latest threats?
Well, you heard that strong comment from Governor J.B. Pritzker. You also saw a response on social media from Mayor Brandon Johnson, who, we'll pull it up on screen there, said, "This is not the first time Trump has tried to have a black man unjustly arrested. I'm not going anywhere." We know that there's also a lot of frustration from the city and state leaders because they don't know anything about this deployment. They're being left in the dark, they say. All that we know, according to the military, according to Northern Command, is that you have about 200 guardsmen from the Texas National Guard here, and then there's about 300 Illinois National Guard members that have been activated, but we don't know where they will ultimately be deployed, where they will be standing guard. You have the city and state leaders pushing back against the idea that you will see National Guard troops on Chicago streets.
And you've been talking to folks there on the ground, Shaq. What are people who live there saying, and what's the mood like since the Texas National Guard arrived yesterday?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll say since the Guard arrived, there hasn't been a noticeable shift in the mood. There will be a protest here later today, but they're protesting not just the deployment of the Guard, they're also protesting Operation Midway Blitz, that increased immigration enforcement that we've been seeing throughout the city. And to that point, that is where you've been seeing a lot of the reaction, a lot of the fear, a lot of the anger, not just here in Chicago, but the surrounding suburbs. There's lots of videos that you're looking at online of masked ICE agents, masked agents with Border Patrol going around putting people in vans. We know that Broadview ICE processing facility has been the site of some clashes in the past. It's been quiet recently, but that is the frustration that you're hearing, targeted at the immigration enforcement. Now it's a new element with the deployment of ICE. Again, we don't know where they will be stationed, but that is something that a lot of people are watching closely.
Well, certainly the epicenter of these tensions. Shaquille Brewster, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Yamiche Alcindor, let me head over to you and ask you about this new reporting. 5 sources familiar with the matter telling our colleagues here that the Trump administration is having increasingly serious discussions about the president invoking the Insurrection Act. What more do we know about those conversations, and when do you think there could be a decision about this?
A good question on the timing. We're not sure. What we do know is that the president, as well as top advisors like Stephen Miller, have been talking more and more about the Insurrection Act. And the president has essentially been wanting to do this because he has at times been losing in court when it comes to trying to federalize these National Guard troops to send them into places like Memphis and Chicago and Portland. We also heard from the Attorney General Pam Bondi just a few moments ago at the White House. Take a listen to what she had to say.
The Biden administration let them commit these crimes with total impunity for years. So did Democrat leaders like Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson.
These leaders in these local cities, along with Pritzker and Johnson, ignore what's going on, or, sir, they're helping Antifa cover it up.
And as a result, you're seeing really White House officials making the case for the fact that they believe that things are just out of hand and that more needs to be done. So the president here could invoke this act again. We don't know when he could do this, but it could possibly be soon because we are seeing these court cases and him losing in these court cases, though the president also been at least hinting at the idea that he might go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which has sided with him in other issues. But the president overall is making the case that there's too much crime, and he's also saying that there's also this sort of attack on federal buildings and especially immigration buildings that he really wants to deal with, Kristen.
And Yamiche, just finally, what more are your sources telling you at the White House about these extraordinary statements by President Trump saying that Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson should be jailed?
They are, Kristen, extraordinary statements. And White House officials have been sort of mum about what they might mean. The president there, as you said, Chicago mayor should be jailed for failing to protect ICE officers. Of course, also calling out the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. But the president hasn't really said what more he could do. He's also not been clear about what they would be charged with, what rules they've been broken, or what laws they've broken. But we do know that, of course, the president has said stuff on social media and then carried it out. We also know that the president has been very clear that he wants the attorney general to go after other political enemies of his. So this is definitely something that we're watching closely and definitely going to see how serious the president is about this, Kristen.
Certainly we will be. Yamiche Alcindor, thank you so much for your great reporting at the White House. Let's head over to Kelly O'Donnell now. So, Kelly, obviously you've been talking to your sources there at the Justice Department. In terms of tracking what the president said, these threats to jail Pritzker and Johnson, is this realistic? The president didn't even say what crime he was referring to.
We don't have any indication yet, Kristen, that this is something that is actionable from the Department of Justice. But as Yamiche pointed out, we have seen a pattern where the president uses what you could arguably call hyperbolic language and directs those who are in his government to take certain actions. This is stunning because it's about elected officials at the state and local level, and there is no specific discussion of what crime. There is a responsibility for elected officials to uphold the laws in their own state. This is really not typically the domain of the federal government. But when the president speaks out in this way, it certainly shines a lot of attention on these issues and can be either politically a useful tool for the president, and conversely, as we saw with Governor Pritzker, a way for him to turn it around and make a political argument. So at the moment, this is all in the zone of rhetoric. Kristen?
Yeah, it's a really important distinction, Kelly. And of course, we should ask you about the other story you are covering today. You're outside the courtroom where former FBI Director James Comey was arraigned today. He pleaded not guilty. Walk us through what happened and why this is such a significant moment.
Well, it is significant, and it really stands out in two ways: discussion of speed and strategy. The judge in this case, Michael Nachmanoff, said that he wants to move expeditiously. He does not want any issues related to discovery or other process issues to get in the way. He's not going to linger, he said. So January 5th, just 90 days from now, a trial date set. Then the question is, will it get to trial? And by that I mean we had what was a bit unexpected today, where Comey's counsel, who is Patrick Fitzgerald, who had been himself a very prominent U.S. attorney based in Chicago for many years, known for some of his national cases, he laid out his intention to argue that these charges against Comey should be dismissed based on a few key things, arguing that this is a vindictive prosecution, a selective prosecution, that there was abuse of the grand jury, and even that the appointed U.S. attorney in an acting role who came from the White House, a woman named Lindsay Halligan, an attorney but never a prosecutor. She was placed in the role here in the Eastern District of Virginia, challenging that appointment as unlawful. So the first step for the Comey defense is to say that the charges and the process up to this point are unlawful, unfair, and should be tossed out. We'll see the next steps, how that unfolds.
We certainly will. Very complicated proceedings there. Kelly, thanks for walking us through everything. Really appreciate it. I'm joined now by Jay Johnson, who served as Homeland Security Secretary in the Obama administration. He's also a former federal prosecutor and served as general counsel of the Defense Department. Secretary, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start first with this trial of James Comey. You heard Kelly there talk about the fact that Comey's attorney is trying to argue that this case shouldn't even go to trial. You obviously have worked with James Comey, but based on what you know, the facts of this case as we know them so far, what's been made public, do you believe this case is going to go to trial?
Well, there's going to be a lot of pretrial activity in this case, which is unusual for a federal criminal case. As you noted, I was a federal prosecutor. I worked alongside Jim Comey and Pat Fitzgerald when we were in the U.S. Attorney's Office, hired by Rudy Giuliani in the late 1980s, early 1990s. There will be a motion to dismiss this indictment for selective vindictive prosecution. Pat Fitzgerald, his defense attorney, is a very, very aggressive attorney. I expect they will seek discovery of emails, of text, going back and forth between the White House and the Department of Justice, which will take some time to litigate. These motions, these type of pretrial motions, are rarely granted, but in this case, it could be a particularly powerful, persuasive motion. The judge set a trial date of January 5. That's relatively fast, pretty fast. I don't expect that this case will go to trial on January 5. But knowing what I know about Jim Comey, I expect that he's looking forward to a trial if we get there, and is probably very anxious to testify and tell his story. And I suspect he will tell it well.
Secretary Johnson, can you explain for our viewers what exactly does vindictive and selective prosecution mean, and why might that be a persuasive argument?
That's a good question. Normally, a selective prosecution would be something in the nature of, you're singling me out because of my race or my religion, or because I exercise my free speech rights. A vindictive prosecution is based upon an improper motive. Here we have a situation that is probably almost unparalleled in American history, where the prosecution is undertaken after the president himself puts out a public statement saying this person should be prosecuted. With all sorts of highly, highly suggestive adjectives and so forth. So it'll be a very persuasive, powerful motion, but in many respects, it'll be unprecedented in American history. In this country, we do not prosecute people for political objectives or because of political vindictiveness, but the president himself has pretty much made that plain.
Well, and it's so critical to hear that broader historical context, Secretary Johnson. I do want to move on to what President Trump said today, arguing Chicago's mayor and Illinois governor should, quote, be in jail for failing to protect ICE officers. What is your reaction to that? And we've been stressing throughout the hour, he didn't say what exactly crime he thought was violated. What do you make of what he said?
Well, I doubt President Trump combed Title 18 of the United States Code before he came up with that. So no one knows what he's talking about. It's impossible to know what he's talking about. And frankly, I don't take it very seriously. It is important to point out the larger picture here, which is that the use of the military for domestic law enforcement purposes is highly, highly unusual in this country. In fact, I believe one of the reasons our U.S. military is so highly regarded and trusted by the American people is because we keep it cabined to overseas conflicts. It is extremely rare to invoke the Insurrection Act, which the president threatened to do now. And so there will be litigation, I'm quite sure, over that, just like there has been in Portland, Oregon.
Secretary Johnson, and you take me to my next question. Talk about why it's so rare that you would see the Insurrection Act invoked, and why would that be such a dramatic step by the president? Our reporting is, according to 5 sources, that there is some serious consideration of doing exactly that within the administration.
There's a principle in U.S. law called a posse comitatus. We do not deploy U.S. military for domestic law enforcement purposes on the streets of America, unless there's a specific statutory exception, like the Insurrection Act. Now, the Insurrection Act is very old. I think it's 1807, with a lot of antiquated language, so one could construe it in very broad terms. It prohibits, for example, unlawful obstructions or assemblages, whatever that means, and permits the president to call out the U.S. military to prevent such a thing from happening. But over time, it's been rarely invoked. I think it's also important to note that within the Department of Homeland Security, you've got the largest number of civilian gun carriers of any cabinet level department, larger than the Department of Justice, which includes the Federal Protective Service, which is a civilian law enforcement agency specifically for the purpose of protecting federal buildings and federal personnel. The judge in Oregon found that the invocation of the U.S. military here was not justified based on the facts. I don't know. I suspect the same is true in Chicago.
Let me ask you, Secretary, broadly about this moment that we are in. One of your focuses when you were head of DHS was countering domestic violent extremism. What do you make of where this country finds itself right now, this spike in political violence and, quite frankly, in inflammatory political rhetoric?
Political violence comes in waves, Kristen. I'm 68 years old. I remember the 1960s, where there was an assassination of a major political figure in this country almost once a year, from Medgar Evers, John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and then Robert Kennedy. Political violence, assassinations, attempted assassinations come in waves. One tends to inspire the other. And I fear we are in the midst of such a period right now. And this kind of environment calls for political leaders, those who command a microphone, on a bipartisan basis to denounce violence, not amp it up.
Well, Secretary Johnson, we really appreciate your being here to give us your perspective and that historical viewpoint, which is so critical right now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.